You need to learn how to combat these mistakes. Back when I was preparing for the SAT, I knew almost all the math concepts. There might have been one or two that I wasn't extremely familiar with, but I still had practiced it and generally knew what it was. But I was still making mistakes. After learning all the math concepts, doing all the practice problems, I reached a score in the low 700s, right? But I got stuck on some types of questions and kept on making mistakes on them. And regardless of wherever you are in terms of your score on the SAT, you can instantly boost your score if you understand how to get over these common math mistakes. So hi, I'm Karthik. These are the top 3 SAT math mistakes and how to solve them. All right, so let's get right into it. The first one, misinterpretation, right? And so what exactly do I mean by that? You're misinterpreting, right? You're falsely understanding something, and that can be within the problem itself or a fundamental concept of the problem. And what I mean by that is either you get the problem, right, and you get every single number that you need to solve, but let's say there's a variable, right? And they want us to figure out like what this added variable is, and we solve for the added variable, right? But mistakenly, right, we have solved for this variable that they have given us when in reality it was something else. So a basic example would be like if I have an equation that says 2x equals 4, what is 2x? And you look at x and you immediately solve for it, right? And this is the idea of misinterpretation, right? It's not exactly this idea that, you're solving for something that isn't given, which I'll go into in the next slide. Misinterpretation tends to be you misunderstand exactly what the question is asking, right? It's not that you're solving for the wrong thing, but you know what the problem is asking for. It's simply the fact that you misunderstood the idea of what it's asking you to do, right? And this loses you points, obviously, because you're getting the wrong answer. You're getting the wrong idea from the question, right? You're misinterpreting it or you're misreading it itself, right? And here's how you combat that, right? This isn't going to help with specifically when you have the right answer and you know exactly what the problem is asking for, but you're not doing it in the fastest method by not solving for the answer. This is going to help you if you're actually misunderstanding the problem, right? And what you're going to do is you have to come up with a way of separating the non-essential information from the essential information. And then with your essential information, what you have to do is explicitly underline it or write it or emphasize it some way where you can see explicitly what it is, right? And the reason why this works is because when we're writing it, we're forced to actually read the problem deeply and relay the information, right? It's the relaying of the information, right? The specific aspects of the problem they're actually asking you for, and that you could potentially mess up if you just forget them or write them incorrectly. This is extremely essential if you want to get a full understanding of the problem. If you constantly encounter this mistake, right? Instead of relying on your head for these values, explicitly write them down so you can just look and instantly grab them without having to refer to the whole question again and reading certain portions of it that might not be useful. Obviously, the way that I've phrased that makes it more applicable to word problems, but this can be applicable to like simple equations as well, because you want to know what it's asking you to do and how you're supposed to get there, right? Now, what we want to do by the end of our writing exercise is get to the point where we're not making this mistake again, right? And maybe we have to explicitly write it every time. That's just up to you, right? Based on how well you think you perform without it. But we want to get to the point where we're not making the mistake and we can, visualize the pieces of information, not have to write it down and not have to take that time. Okay. So the next mistake, as I talked about previously, is solving for the wrong answer. So the last one was based on misinterpreting what it was, but now you explicitly know what the answer is, right? The equation is 4x equals 4, right? And it's asking you to solve for 4x, right? So the answer is 4, but in an attempt to find that, you first solve for x and then you plug it in, right? And this is actually the wrong thing to do, because not only could you give yourself the potential of being inaccurate, you waste time, right? You waste time, and this is more detrimental to your score because you're depriving yourself of time for other questions that if you might have had just a little more time to solve, you could have been much better at, right? And what you're going to do is, again, understand that you've been trained with this mentality. You've been trained with this mentality to solve for whatever is missing, but the SAT exploits that by not having the answer be explicitly what is missing, but a different version of that, right? So instead of what is missing, it'll be what is missing times 4, right? And obviously the what is missing is the variable or whatever that you're trying to solve for. And the SAT loves to exploit that fact. So what you're going to do, right? don't confuse the missing portion with the answer, right? Every time that you think of questions like this, you need to separate the idea of the missing portion and the answer. And then based on that, right, missing portion and answer, you need to figure out exactly what you're trying to solve for, right? Algebra trained you to do that and do it incorrectly for the exam. So we need to break out of this mentality by separating it in our heads, right? And all that I really did, like in terms of separating it, is I realized that I needed to fully read the question and just make that, idea in my head of the missing portion and the answer. And then I just kept repeating that skill, right? Every time I encountered a question that had a missing value, what I would do is I would focus on that idea of separating them, and I just did it in my head constantly again and again to see if it was correct. And generally after doing that a bunch of times, it became like a second nature to me, and I pretty much got it right every single time as a result. And on top of that, I figured out a shortcut, right? A proper shortcut to actually find out your answer, right? And that shortcut saves you time because I figured out like the certain ways that the question gets manipulated to easily find the answer without solving for the variables, right? And that's going to save you so much time. And of course, saving time is going to make you more accurate on other questions. Okay. Spending too much time on hard questions. Now, this goes back to the idea before, except the idea before is, it's a question that you do understand. You're just solving it for in the incorrect way. Now, I'm going to show you, there's going to be like specific hard questions, right, that you're going to encounter with, and I'm going to show you like what you specifically need to be aware of, right? And this idea that you do a hard question, right, and you're halfway through solving it, but you've spent more than the time allotted, right? So the total amount of time divided by the amount of questions, that's the time allotted per question. And the SAT is standardized to have all those problems be like that, right? To have all the problems take generally the same amount of time and not take 5 minutes and the others take like 30 seconds. That's not how the SAT is built. So based on that idea, every moment that you spend over that time, you're depriving that time from another question that could be easier to solve and that you know how to solve it if given the proper amount of time. So this is the basic idea of the sunk cost fallacy, where you're spending time and you think that, oh, just if I spend a little more time and I get it right, it'll be a useful use of my time. And that's actually not true, because as soon as you encounter that kind of hard question and you realize you're exceeding the duration, you should instantly quit it and go to the next one, right? Because all points are worth the same. And if you dump extra time into one, you could be potentially like ruining your chance at getting another question that is easier correct, right? And this is how I want you to think of the SAT from now on. I want you to think of it as a standardized thing where all the questions generally take the same amount of time. And it is true that all the points are worth exactly the same, regardless if it's a hard or an easy question, right? So what you're going to do in preparation of this, right? Because I already told you what to do when you encounter the hard question. You need to actually practice doing that though, because just doing it is extremely difficult to just do the first time you encounter it. So what you're going to do is you're going to figure out all the hardest skills for you during your practice. So like figure out what types of questions are actually difficult for you and be prepared to skip them, right? And practice skipping them on your tests and coming back to them and see how much your accuracy improves from that, right? And doing these strategies is going to help you because you're going to improve your accuracy on all the other questions, right? So actually prepare this strategy, outside of your testing environment. Okay. Here's some bonus mistakes that you're going to instantly be able to correct, right? And one, obviously not knowing all the skills that are on the Mass SAT. If you don't know that, just go on Khan Academy and start learning them, right? Every single one that you don't know, and you can figure out the ones that you don't know by taking practice tests. That is going to help you instantly boost your score, right? As soon as you learn them, right? And not practicing all the methods that I've shown you during practice tests, you can make sure that they actually work, right? Because they work for me. They might not work for you. You might need to make a slight tweak or change some portion of it to make it work for you. And taking a practice test and actually testing them can make sure that you know that it actually works for you, right? Not knowing the shortcuts to certain problems and the fastest way to solve them. And that's just by getting familiar with the problem and doing it again and again. And on practice tests, just see how the SAT solves for it, right? If you're interested in a private community where you can get accountability from me and other people, and where you can get a community of people just like you taking the SAT to share and give advice for, and live lectures that are going to be hosted 4 to 5 times a week by me, where you can ask any question and where we can go over SAT problems, click the first link in the description. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you learned something today.